Ladies, gentlemen, and protectors of all ages, yesterday came with the release of the newest game from Capcom, Kunitsu-Gami Path of the Goddess. This is a super unique style of game that feels like a passionate mix of multiple different genres, and in a world where the majority of large game companies are only releasing things that are considered safe, things like sequels or proven genre formulas, Capcom is one that seems to be much more willing to take risks and still go on to make unique games like this one. So today I'm going to talk about my own time playing with this game so far, my thoughts on it in general, a sort of review, first impressions type of thing, and then I sort of want to expand it with this to talk about Capcom as a whole, as a big part of this channel is Monster Hunter, which is of course also made by Capcom, and so the trajectory and track record of the company is definitely an important thing to keep an eye on for us. First up then, the game itself. Right from the get-go, I have to talk about the art style and the graphics as a whole, because this game is absolutely gorgeous. It isn't going for like a high fidelity realism sort of vibe, it has its own concept and it sticks to it and pushes it and works around it, and I just think it is one of the best looking games that I have played in the last couple of years, and it does that in a very stylized manner. Past that, it hits just such an interesting blend of tower defense and action combat, almost closer to a real-time strategy game where you are also controlling your own character that has full-on action moves, reminiscent of Dungeon Defenders or Orcs Must Die, but in a much more story-driven style and less about defending wave after wave of growing numbers of enemies, and more about trying to nail down each stage that you go through and juggle your resources between progressing the path faster or building up your villagers' strengths to make the fighting easier when it happens, as these share a resource cost. And it feels just much more deliberate with the combat than those sort of games, less of a sort of hack and slash type of thing, though it is still very hack and slash at its core, but it also has things like guarding and dodging systems involved, unblockable abilities from enemies, stun bars, health and healing systems, building and facility repairs, and a relatively in-depth character building system to make your setup unique compared to other players as well. On top of that, outside of brief exposition early on, nobody actually talks in this game. There's no dialogue, and even so, the game still has tons of cutscenes. I'm not saying any of this is a bad thing, though obviously if you're someone with minimal patience for stuff like that who just wants to swing a sword at things, this won't necessarily be your jam unless you skip all of it, but it just presents itself as a really unique piece of media, almost equally as much a cinematic experience as it is a video game meant to be played. I honestly am tempted to label this just purely as art, in the sense that video games in general are a sort of art form, of course, but this stands past that concept and breaks that barrier and that label, and it's just sort of art in and of itself, regardless of the fact that it is a video game. Most of the communication between characters is expressed through dance, the swordplay itself is entirely built around the concept of dancing motions, and the animations because of this are just so beautiful, and it just creates this absolutely breathtaking atmosphere for the game, an incredible immersion within it too, that makes it really hard not to get sucked into the world as you play it. As for more in-depth stuff for the gameplay, as you progress to different areas, you can find villagers to purify. Once you purify a villager, you can control where they stand, how they act, and using crystals, the main currency of the game, you can set them to one of honestly quite a number of roles that you unlock throughout your journey. And without spoiling any later game unlocks, the earliest examples are the woodcutter, who gets an axe as a melee weapon for a bit more damage and resilience than just a base villager, and the archer, which, well, is an archer with quick ranged attacks, and each of these roles has their own full upgrade tree, their own range, their own positioning, their own concepts that you can interact with through the game if there are some things that you actually prefer using over the other roles, which also makes repeat playthroughs of the game much more of an intriguing concept as well. That said, while there are somewhat tower defense elements to this game, choosing your unit's roles and placing them, you can also control them actively in a fight, such as quick commands to make them protect the priestess, move around to the back to actually protect the back line, or make them move up and attack your target much more actively. And while you might expect the game to function entirely around smaller encounters of lots of little dudes running at you, sort of wave clearing style, that is only one part of the game, because there are also full-on boss fight encounters in between the stages, with proper mechanics within them, attacks that require dodging or blocking, attacks that can break through both dodges and blocks, so you have to specifically use the right one for the moment, a resist mechanic that you can use to break and stun the enemies and make them take extra damage, and all the while you are managing your villagers between protecting and attacking based on the timing and the moment within the fight. Not to mention there are special moves that you can unleash yourself as you charge them up through combat, so the game is just much deeper than it may appear at a surface level, to the point that most people aren't even aware that there are bosses in this unless you've watched something like this. On the whole, the game is extremely well put together, it feels very well made, it's satisfying as hell, both the tower defense part of it and the action combat side as well. It's extremely deep as far as how you choose to build your power, leaning into the different roles, different sword powers, the upgrade trees, all that stuff, and again, the general atmosphere of the game surrounding it all is just a living work of art. My only complaints, if I had to give something really, are that the camera was a bit awkward to control. I can clearly see that they're going for a very cinematic angle type of style with this, and it looks very good when it works, but it's a bit awkward to actually move around with your own hands. That said though, I don't think that really takes away from the game really as a whole. It's just something that you have to adapt to and adjust to after picking it up for the first time. But once you have it under control, the rest of the game feels just great, really. With all that said then, I want to pivot the conversation to talk about Capcom in general. I briefly touched on this to begin with, but Capcom seems to be in a unique space among the larger game developers in the modern era, where most of them are extremely risk averse. They just keep sort of doing what they know will work, what they know will sell, with minor changes here or there, even in follow-ups to the same series. Capcom seems, however, much more willing to take larger steps, larger deviations from proven formulas, and while usually that can be a bit of a give and take type of deal, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, Capcom has for years now delivered pretty much nothing but genuinely solid games. From things like how Monster Hunter is run with these massive changes from every single game within the franchise, things like the wire bugs, the way endemic life works, the hunter arts and styles and generations, and even the leap from 4th generation to world in 5th gen as a whole, just going into a proper open world style. All of these were massive risks, and every one of them has paid off. Sure, Rise isn't world, but it was never meant to be, and a unique part of this is that it keeps people going back to older games, because unlike many modern game franchises, a new game in the series isn't viewed or intended to be a replacement or an upgrade, but more so just an alternate option that sure is usually technologically superior. That said, Monster Hunter is Monster Hunter, but this concept applies to Capcom at large. Kunitsu-Gami is an extremely unique style of game, absolutely gorgeous down to its core, and a really well thought out bunch of systems within it too. But it isn't overly derivative of other things either, and even with its target audience being relatively small as far as the gaming market is concerned for this type of genre mix, it's getting glowing reviews across the board. It's just being a genuinely fantastic creation. Last year there was Exoprimal from Capcom. I played that game personally for over 100 hours over the course of a couple of weeks before work got busy and tore me away from it. And again, while the game wasn't necessarily made for everyone, the target audience was relatively niche. However, it was still an extremely satisfying experience to those that it applies to. And that's sort of what Capcom is getting really, really good at, and what they've always really been good at. You can expand that to Resident Evil, to Ace Attorney, Devil May Cry, the list goes on and on. Whether they be single game entries from the studio or full franchises, Capcom has given these games the room to grow however the developers think is best for it. Not just small steps from game to game that don't take any risks, but very, very big departures. And look at the results. Capcom is winning. Capcom stays winning. Game after game after game is just a really solid entry. And as someone who considers themselves a pretty big Capcom fan in general, that's just really exciting to me, honestly. The more success that Capcom has with these riskier moves, the more risky they will be willing to get in the future. And while risk can come to bite you in the ass on occasion, risk is also the only real way to achieve true advancement in any sort of industry, including with video games. New mechanics, new concepts, new ideas, even changes to base formulas people have stuck to for years, and new genre ideas. There are plenty of full-on gaming genres that wouldn't even exist without someone willing to take that kind of risk to make the first game for it in the first place. So it's just always good to see this from a company who has the assets to actually back it up. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Just my own first impressions review type of deal for Kunitsu-Gami Path of the Goddess, as well as just a little chat about just how interesting it is to me to have been watching Capcom's recent releases, their recent choices and moves. Sure, they've had some moments like talking about mods that is not necessarily ideal, but the actual games that they release are just doing really well, and the results of seeing how all this is playing out is quite a big deal to me. I hope you've enjoyed this then, and absolutely do try this game out for yourself if it sounds interesting to you. It's available in a bunch of different places for a pretty standard AAA game price. However, if you have Xbox Game Pass, it is just a part of that you can access quite easily. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.